Every morning, before the world reaches for you, before messages, noise, obligations, and expectations begin to pull at your mind, there is a quiet moment that decides the direction of your entire day. Most people waste this moment. They wake up already defeated, already scattered, already reacting. But the morning is not meant for reaction, it is meant for orientation. When you wake, you are closest to your unconscious. Your defenses are low, your habitual masks are not yet fully in place. This is why the morning is powerful. Whatever you allow to shape you in these first moments becomes the lens through which you interpret the rest of the day. Do not reach for distraction. Do not numb yourself with urgency. Instead, sit in stillness and ask one honest question. What is asking to be lived through me today? Not what you fear, not what others demand, but what truth, however uncomfortable, wants your attention. Most suffering is not caused by hardship. It is caused by avoidance. Each morning, people silently agree to abandon themselves, choosing comfort over clarity. But what you avoid does not disappear. It waits. It grows. It becomes anxiety, resentment, fatigue, and a vague sense that life is slipping past you. To change your life, you must confront yourself daily in small, deliberate ways. Acknowledge your resistance. Notice where you feel tension. These signals are not enemies. They are messages from parts of you that have been ignored for too long. Then, choose one act of alignment. Not something dramatic, something precise. One task that strengthens your inner authority. One disciplined action that tells your psyche, I can trust myself. This is how confidence is built, not through affirmation, but through kept promises to the self. As the sun rises, commit to carrying consciousness into the day. Watch your reactions. When you are irritated, ask why. When you are afraid, ask what is at stake. When you feel small, ask what power you are refusing to claim. Life stops controlling you the moment you begin interpreting it instead of fleeing from it. Do this every morning, and something subtle but irreversible happens. You stop living unconsciously. You stop being driven by old wounds and inherited patterns. You begin shaping your life from the inside out, not perfectly, not quickly, but truthfully. And a life lived in truth, even quietly, becomes unshakable. The morning is not simply the beginning of a schedule. It is the moment in which the psyche chooses its posture toward life. When you wake, your mind has not yet armored itself with roles, expectations, and habitual defenses. You are closer to your inner reality than at any other time of day. In these early moments, the tone is set not by what happens to you, but by what you allow to enter you. If the first thing you consume is urgency, comparison, or noise, your inner world organizes itself around reaction. You become psychologically oriented toward defense rather than direction, toward surviving the day instead of shaping it. What happens in the morning quietly programs your nervous system. A rush beginning teaches the psyche that life is threatening and time is an enemy. This state follows you into conversations, decisions, and conflicts. Even neutral events are interpreted as pressure, and small challenges feel overwhelming. The mind, once oriented toward anxiety, searches all day for evidence that confirms it was right to be tense. In this way, the morning does not just influence the day, it becomes the invisible architect of perception, determining how reality is filtered and understood. When the morning is claimed consciously, the opposite occurs. Stillness, even for a few minutes, signals safety to the inner world. It tells the psyche that it is not being hunted by the day ahead. In this state, clarity becomes possible. Thoughts slow, sensations become noticeable, and emotional undercurrents rise into awareness. This is not weakness, it is psychological strength. Only a mind that is not panicked can choose its responses rather than be ruled by them. Many people believe their mood is caused by external events, but more often it is caused by the inner stance they adopted before those events occurred. A fragmented morning creates a fragmented sense of self. Attention scatters, priorities blur, and the individual moves through the day feeling slightly displaced, as if life is happening just ahead of them. This disconnection is subtle, but it accumulates, producing fatigue that no amount of rest seems to cure. The morning also determines whether the unconscious will dominate the day or cooperate with it. When you rush forward without reflection, old patterns take control automatically. Unresolved fears, unexamined habits, and inherited beliefs steer behavior without permission. But when you pause and observe yourself early, you bring these forces into partial awareness. They lose some of their grip, not because they are defeated, but because they are seen. A conscious morning is an act of self-respect. It is the decision to meet yourself before meeting the world. In doing so, you establish an inner reference point that remains stable even as circumstances change. Challenges no longer feel like personal attacks, and successes do not inflate the ego beyond balance. The day unfolds, but it does not own you. Your psychological direction has already been set, quietly and firmly. In the moments when the world was still asleep, stillness before stimulation is not an escape from life, but a return to what has been drowned out by constant noise. When the mind is immediately flooded with information, demands, and external signals, it loses contact with its own center. Thoughts become reactive, emotions become borrowed, and attention fractures before it has a chance to gather itself. In this state, you are not living from your inner truth. You are orbiting around the expectations, fears, and rhythms imposed from the outside. Stillness interrupts this process and creates a space where the psyche can speak in its own language. Inner truth does not announce itself loudly. It rarely arrives as a clear sentence or a dramatic realization. More often, it appears as a sensation, a subtle resistance, a quiet pull toward or away from something. These signals are easily missed when the nervous system is overstimulated. Noise makes everything feel equally urgent, flattening distinctions between what matters and what merely demands attention. Stillness restores depth. It allows you to notice the difference between genuine desire and conditioned impulse, between intuition and anxiety, pretending to be guidance. When you sit in silence before stimulation, the mind begins to reveal what it has been carrying beneath the surface. Unfinished emotions, unspoken thoughts, and neglected needs rise into awareness. This can feel uncomfortable at first because stillness removes the usual distractions that keep inner conflict at bay. Yet this discomfort is not a problem, it is evidence of reconnection. What has been ignored is finally being acknowledged, and acknowledgement is the first step toward integration. Stimulation, when it comes too early, trains the psyche to avoid itself. The habit of immediately checking screens or immersing in activity reinforces the belief that inner experience is either unimportant or intolerable. Over time, this avoidance creates a sense of emptiness, as if something essential is missing but cannot be named. Stillness counters this by teaching the mind that it is safe to remain present with itself. Safety is the condition under which truth becomes accessible. In moments of quiet, contradictions within you can coexist without needing immediate resolution. You may feel both motivated and afraid, hopeful and doubtful. Instead of being forced into premature action, these opposing forces are allowed to inform one another. This is how inner truth becomes nuanced rather than rigid. It is not a fixed rule, but a living orientation that adjusts as you become more conscious of yourself. Stillness also restores authorship over your inner narrative. Without it, your sense of self is continually rewritten by headlines, opinions, and external pressures. With it, you remember what actually matters to you, not in theory, but in felt reality. Decisions made from this place carry a different weight. They are quieter, less performative, and more durable. By choosing stillness before stimulation, you align yourself with your own psychological depth. You stop treating your inner world as an inconvenience and begin relating to it as a source of guidance. What emerges is not perfection or constant certainty, but honesty. And honesty, once reestablished, becomes the most reliable compass you have. Avoidance begins as a form of self-protection, but over time, it becomes the very source of suffering it was meant to prevent. In the moment, turning away from discomfort feels like relief. The mind convinces itself that postponing a difficult thought, emotion, or decision will preserve stability. Yet, what is avoided does not dissolve. It retreats into the unconscious, where it continues to influence perception, behavior, and emotional tone without being questioned or understood. This is how short-term comfort transforms into long-term distress. When an experience is avoided, it remains incomplete. Emotions that are not felt fully do not resolve. They linger as tension in the body and as restlessness in the mind. Fear that is not faced quietly reorganizes life around itself. Choices become smaller, risks feel heavier, and the world gradually appears more threatening than it truly is. The individual may not remember the original source of fear, but they live inside its consequences every day. Avoidance also fragments the inner world. Parts of the self that carry anger, grief, desire, or vulnerability are pushed aside to maintain an image of control. But these parts do not disappear. They express themselves indirectly through irritability, fatigue, self-sabotage, or emotional numbness. The more consistently they are ignored, the more forcefully they demand attention. What could have been integrated through awareness returns as symptom. Over time, avoidance erodes self-trust. Each instance of turning away sends a subtle message to the psyche that it cannot handle truth. This creates a fragile inner authority, one that relies on constant distraction and reassurance. Confidence becomes performative rather than grounded, and the individual depends increasingly on external validation to feel stable. Beneath this surface, a quiet anxiety grows, fueled by the knowledge that something important is being left unaddressed. Long-term suffering often feels vague and pervasive rather than dramatic. It shows up as a sense of being stuck, of repeating the same patterns despite wanting change. Relationships follow familiar painful loops, ambitions stall and motivation fades. This stagnation is not a lack of ability but a lack of confrontation. Growth demands contact with what has been avoided because the energy required for transformation is trapped inside unresolved inner conflict. Facing what has been avoided does not eliminate pain, but it changes its quality. Conscious pain has boundaries. It moves, teaches, and eventually transforms. Avoided pain has no such limits. It seeps into unrelated areas of life, coloring everything with unease. When you turn toward discomfort with awareness, you reclaim the power that was given to it through avoidance. The feared experience becomes a source of information rather than a threat. In this way, suffering is not an enemy but a signal. It points toward areas of life that require honesty and attention. By meeting these areas directly, you interrupt the cycle that sustains long-term distress. What once controlled you from the shadows becomes something you can relate to consciously, and the psyche, no longer divided against itself, begins to regain its natural capacity for balance and resilience. Daily self-confrontation is not an act of harsh self-judgment, but a practice of honesty that gradually builds inner authority and strength. To confront oneself means to be willing to see what is actually present rather than what is convenient or flattering. Most people avoid this because it threatens the image they hold of themselves. Yet, without this confrontation, the psyche remains governed by unconscious patterns and authority over one, as life is quietly surrendered to habit, fear, and external influence. When you confront yourself daily, you begin to notice where your actions and values are misaligned. You see the gap between what you intend and what you actually do. This awareness can feel uncomfortable, even discouraging, but it is the foundation of strength. Strength does not arise from believing you are already whole. It arises from taking responsibility for the parts of you that are undeveloped or conflicted. Each time you acknowledge a weakness without collapsing into shame, you reclaim a piece of inner authority. Inner authority is built through repeated acts of truth-telling to oneself. When you admit, even privately, where you are avoiding responsibility, where you are blaming others, or where you are acting out of fear, you stop being ruled by those forces. They lose their power because they are no longer hidden. What is unconscious controls behavior. What is conscious can be shaped. Daily confrontation turns awareness into a habit rather than a crisis response. This process also creates psychological strength by establishing self-trust. When you consistently face yourself, you prove that you can handle reality even when it is uncomfortable. The psyche learns that it does not need to distort, deny, or escape in order to survive. This trust is not built through affirmations or motivational language, but through lived experience. You show yourself day after day that you are capable of meeting your own truth without breaking. Without self-confrontation, strength becomes brittle. Depends on circumstances going well and on others behaving as expected. With it, strength becomes internal and stable. Challenges are no longer experienced solely as threats to self-esteem, but as information about where growth is needed. Failure becomes instructive rather than humiliating, and success becomes grounding rather than inflating. Daily confrontation also prevents the accumulation of inner conflict. Small acts of avoidance, if left unexamined, harden into patterns that feel impossible to change. Addressed early, they remain manageable. By facing yourself regularly, you keep your inner world flexible and responsive. You do not allow unresolved tension to solidify into resentment or despair. Over time, this practice produces a quiet confidence. You are less dependent on approval because your sense of worth is anchored in honesty rather than performance. Decisions feel clearer because they are informed by awareness rather than impulse. Inner authority emerges not as dominance, but as coherence. You become someone whose actions are guided from within. And that alignment is the essence of real strength. More disciplined actions are often underestimated because they lack drama, yet they are the primary way self-trust and confidence are built. The psyche does not measure strength by grand intentions or sudden transformations. It measures it by consistency between what is promised and what is done. Each time you follow through on a small commitment, you send a quiet but powerful message inward: you are reliable. Over time, this message reshapes how you experience yourself. Confidence is not a mood that appears when circumstances are favorable. It is a relationship with yourself. When that relationship is unstable, reassurance must come from outside praise, recognition, or success. But when you act with discipline in small ways, you begin to generate trust internally. You no longer need to convince yourself that you are capable. Your actions have already proven it. Large goals often intimidate because they demand a future version of you that does not yet exist. Small actions, repeated daily, allow growth to occur without overwhelming the psyche. They lower resistance. Getting up at the same time, completing a modest task, or honoring a brief period of focus may seem insignificant, but these acts accumulate. The unconscious records them as evidence. Slowly, doubt loses its authority because it can no longer argue against lived experience. Self-trust grows when the inner world becomes predictable. When you know that you will do what you say you will do, anxiety decreases. You stop negotiating with yourself and start acting from clarity. This predictability creates psychological safety, and safety is the ground from which confidence emerges. A mind that feels secure does not need to posture or prove itself. It can remain steady under pressure. Discipline also integrates conflicting parts of the self. There is often a part that wants comfort and a part that seeks growth. When you take small disciplined actions, you do not silence either side. You acknowledge discomfort while still choosing direction. This balance teaches the psyche that growth does not require self-betrayal. Confidence formed this way is calm, not aggressive. It does not need to dominate because it is not fragile. Without discipline, confidence becomes inflated or brittle. It depends on motivation, which fluctuates, or on success, which is never guaranteed. With discipline, confidence becomes grounded. Even on difficult days, you know you can rely on your own structure. Failure does not destroy you because your identity is not built on outcomes, but on effort and integrity. Over time, small disciplined actions reshape self-perception. You begin to see yourself as someone who shows up, someone who follows through, someone capable of endurance. This identity is not claimed, it is earned. And because it is earned gradually, it remains intact when circumstances change. Self-trust and confidence, built this way, are not loud or performative. They are quiet, stable, and deeply rooted in the knowledge that you can depend on yourself. Conscious awareness changes the quality of inner experience by slowing down the automatic chain between stimulus and response. Most reactions occur without choice. A word is spoken, a look is given, a memory is triggered, and the body responds before the mind understands what has happened. In this reactive state, emotions feel absolute and unquestionable. Anger appears justified, fear feels protective, and withdrawal seems necessary. Awareness interrupts this immediacy, creating a small but decisive space in which meaning can be examined rather than acted out. When awareness is present, reactions are no longer taken at face value. Instead of asking what should be done, the mind begins to ask what is actually happening. A surge of irritation becomes an invitation to explore unmet expectations or hidden vulnerability. Anxiety becomes a signal pointing toward uncertainty or unresolved conflict. By observing reactions, rather than obeying them, the individual shifts from being controlled by inner events to being in relationship with them. This shift transforms emotional experience from something threatening into something informative. Reactions often carry fragments of past experience that have not been integrated. A current situation activates an old emotional memory, and the intensity of the response belongs more to history than to the present moment. Without awareness, the past repeats itself unconsciously. With awareness, the repetition becomes visible. What once felt confusing begins to make sense when seen as part of a larger psychological pattern. Conscious awareness also softens self-judgment. When reactions are unconscious, they are often followed by shame or justification. The individual either condemns themselves for overreacting or defends the reaction as unavoidable. Awareness replaces both extremes with curiosity. Instead of asking what is wrong with me, the question becomes what is this reaction trying to protect or express? Understanding emerges not through analysis alone, but through sustained attention without immediate interference. As awareness deepens, emotional intensity decreases. This does not happen because emotions are suppressed, but because they are metabolized. Being fully present with the reaction allows it to move through the psyche rather than remaining stuck. The nervous system learns that feelings can be experienced without leading to catastrophe. This realization builds emotional resilience and reduces the need for defensive behavior. Over time, awareness alters how relationships are experienced. Conflicts no longer escalate automatically because reactions are recognized before they are projected onto others. Communication becomes clearer as responses are informed by understanding rather than impulse. The individual becomes less entangled in drama because they are no longer compelled to act out every emotional surge. Understanding, in this sense, is not intellectual agreement but embodied clarity. It is the knowledge that arises when experience is met directly rather than resisted. Conscious awareness turns inner chaos into a map. What once felt overwhelming becomes navigable. Reactions lose their authority as commands and take on their rightful place as signals. Through this process, life becomes less about managing emotional fallout and more about engaging reality with insight and presence. So if you are looking for a single change that reshapes everything, let it be this: stop living on automatic. Meet your mornings with awareness, your discomfort with honesty, and your actions with discipline. Each day, choose consciousness over escape, understanding over reaction, and truth over convenience. You do not need to master life all at once. You only need to show up awake to it. When you do, strength forms quietly, confidence steadies itself, and your inner world begins to cooperate rather than conflict. From that place, life no longer controls you. You participate in it with clarity, purpose, and a grounded sense of self.